On November 7th, 2024, the voters in the United States of America re-elected Donald J. Trump, a controversial political figure, in an election that was watched and was felt throughout the world.
Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States, winning what had been expected, of course, to be a razor-tight and historic race.
So the man who has upended all the rules of politics in America is president for a second time.
Shortly after his election, President-elect Trump made good on his promises to remake the image of federal administration with a slew of candidates for various government positions.
Trump just announcing that our own Pete Hegseth will be his Secretary of Defense. Pete, of course, has been a host here at Fox for a number of years. He's an Army veteran where he served in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Trump saying, quote, Pete has spent his entire life as a warrior for the troops and for the country.
The United States Department of Defense is the second largest employer in the world, with a total of almost 2.9 million employees, both as active duty military and reserve personnel, as well as civilian contractors. Predictably for this high-level appointment, and based on some of his experiences and prior media coverage, Hegseth quickly found himself in the center of controversy.
I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated.
Which appeared to do little to deter the Trump team from pursuing this appointment. That's exactly when unidentified sources dropped the public bombshell.
Fox News host Pete Hegseth, nominated to be defense secretary, was once investigated over a sexual assault allegation. Cops investigated but did not charge him with any crime. A police report obtained by Inside Edition says the alleged sexual assault happened after midnight on October 8, 2017. It says no weapons were involved, but the woman making the complaint had contusions on the right thigh.
To discuss the allegations against Hegseth and debunk some of the common myths or misconceptions about what they may represent, we turn to Monterey County criminal defense attorneys, William Pernik and Roland Soltis, who represent clients like Mr. Hegseth says, accused of sexual assault in that area.
Good evening, Roland. I know you and I were just talking about this case last night, and yes. I find it very interesting that just a couple of years after you and I exposed the fraud Joe Biden accuser Tara Reade,
yes,
our small area once again finds itself in the news. This time was a sexual assault allegation made by a Republican woman against Pete Hegseth, the Trump nominee for the Secretary of Defense. What do you think that means? Is this an elusive example of bipartisanship in our troubled times?
Well, you know, one of the things that this allegation shows is we don't really know who it came from, what their background is actually. We really don't know. So what it really shows is that, you know, anybody can be accused of sexual assault at any time. And we have to be very careful before we jump into this and make conclusions about what these accusations represent. Because just because somebody said something doesn't make it true. You know, we've learned about this greatly. I mean, in the Tara Reade case years ago, the Joe Biden accuser from 2020 elections, we learned, you know, she lied about her background. She lied about her academic credentials. She even lied about her name. And when we investigated, we found out she lied about her horse rescue, her animal rescue. And this was a woman that sat in front of multiple juries in Monterey County, told them about her domestic violence expertise, and convinced juries, based upon her totally made-up credentials and stories, to convict. And it led to a score of cases being overturned in Monterey County. And we were actually the attorneys that exposed her misdeeds. It actually, in this case, points to the fact that there are people out there that have axes to grind. And whether it's in a child custody situation, a divorce situation, or any type of situation, a bad breakup, that we have to be very careful and we have to look at where these accusations are coming from, especially when accusations don't result in any criminal charges
or
any convictions. And when they're closed after what we understand is an appropriate legal inquiry. What does this really mean?
Right. I agree with you, Roland. And certainly this is not a political statement by either one of us or endorsement, or endorsement of Hegseth or, an opposition to his endorsement in any way. But as criminal defense lawyers, I think there's a real risk out there from our perspective as lawyers that folks hear that someone has been accused and they immediately jump to a conclusion that accusation equals conviction. Accusation equals fact-finding that someone is guilty. And that's just not how our system works. And so despite our personal or political beliefs, whatever they might be, when we see something like this, I think we have a duty to call it out as defense lawyers and say, wait a minute, that's not what it represents. That's not what it means.
Yeah. And an investigation in 2017 that did not result in any charges, after what appears to have been an appropriate inquiry by the Monterey Police Department and the Monterey County District Attorney's Office, if they even got to that point where they became involved, and nothing has been filed. There was nothing about this. We're talking about 7 years after the fact, and we haven't heard anything about it. I mean, it leads one to believe that there's probably not much veracity to these charges. However, it's important to look at the process of how these accusations and what they do in an investigation like this.
I agree, Roland. I think the problem is that the general public may sometimes be quite easily misled because there's not a very good understanding, as you said, of how the process works. And so salacious details that, may or may not have been strategically leaked in the middle of this fairly controversial political appointment, they can very easily destroy a person's reputation or career or sabotage one's prospects for getting a job, as clearly in this case. And so we have to take a look at how the process actually works, break down what we know, and then look at it objectively as opposed to immediately jumping to conclusion that fits our belief system or narrative when we're dealing with someone that perhaps we don't like or don't want to see get a particular position, because that's just not right.
No, it's not right. So, William, what I'd like you to do is if you could pretty much break down the process of what happens when an accusation is made, and explain it to our viewers and break it down.
Sure. Well, I think, Roland, to start with, when a person makes an allegation of sexual assault in the county of Monterey, typically a person would call a number. They would call police. If they call right after the assault happened, they might call an emergency line. But if this is something, as in this case, that gets reported days after the fact, they may call a non-emergency line. Generally speaking, a patrol officer will be the first one to report. They're going to talk to the person who's making the report and find out what's going on. Once they learn that what's going on is that somebody is reporting an allegation of sexual misconduct, sexual assault, they're going to assign this to a sex crimes detective. These are officers who go to specialized training on investigating sexual assault cases. They know all of the investigative techniques. They know how to gather and preserve evidence, or at least they should. And then they go about meeting with the alleged victim, the accuser in a particular case, and they interview that person. They document evidence. They might encourage them to do a pretextual phone call where they try to set up the suspect in the case. They will collect any physical evidence. They will do sexual assault, rape, trauma examination if it's still available, considering the timing of the report. And so there's quite a lot of work that goes on before a police officer most likely will even contact the suspect, because they're going to try and build up their case. They're going to take it very seriously.
And so let me ask you a question. Here in Monterey County, we give a lot of conferences. There's high net worth individuals that live around here. We have famous people coming all the time that are visiting, speaking at conferences, just like this conference here, where we understand Pete Hegseth was speaking at a Republican women's conference. In your experience in Monterey County, being here for as many years as you've been here, do you find that the police ever find favorites in these cases? Do they say because this person is worth this amount of money or they're a big name person that they pull punches?
I'm really glad you brought this up, Roland, because that was part of the reason why I agreed to sort of sit down with you and do this video. I really don't think that in this particular case, it's fair to somehow sow doubt about the criminal justice system in Monterey County, or implied that somehow because Hegseth was Hegseth as opposed to an average individual, the only reason he didn't get charged is because of some sort of political bias or favoritism. I really just don't think that's the case. My opinion is that this is a case where a person, we presume a woman, reported sexual assault that happened on her. Police officers followed exact procedures they follow in these types of cases. They conducted an investigation, and I think possibly for one of three reasons. Either because they felt there was insufficient evidence to believe that Hegseth committed sexual assault, or they may have been dealing with a situation where the alleged victim or accuser in this case had a change of heart or decided to not cooperate with them further, or they simply felt that regardless of what she was saying, there was just not enough based on the facts and circumstances of the case to persuade a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think one of those three scenarios, and not some sort of political favoritism or bias, explains why this case didn't go anywhere, because just because there is smoke doesn't mean there is fire.
And now, in your experience, and in my experience, I found that the Monterey Police Department is one of the more professional agencies around here. They take these types of allegations seriously. They are very worried about the security and the safety of this community. It's not something that they would just sweep under the table for any reason.
Well, certainly not with crimes of sexual assault. I mean, you and I recorded a video a little bit earlier this week where we talked about how sexual assault crimes have become a favorite area of investigation for officers. You know, officers really feel that they're doing important work when they close a sexual assault investigation. So they're not going to blow off a victim or alleged victim of sexual assault right away just because somebody is a bigwig. And Hegseth wasn't a bigwig in 2017.
No,
at that time, he was just a commentator on TV and a mid-level officer.
Yeah. But even if anybody was accused of this crime, in your practice and your experience, and I believe surely in my experience, I don't see that Monterey Police Department ever cuts corners. They do a professional investigation. They go forward and they look forward. And just as you said, there's a lot of reasons why the investigation might not have gone forward. And in a lot of these investigations, you know, there's just no backup. There's all kinds of statements that come out, and sometimes the police find them credible, and sometimes the police find them not credible for a variety of reasons that we see. And another thing in this case that I think that we don't know happened is quite often in these cases, I know you've seen that, quite often in these cases what we see is that the police officers, they do take the reports, they get all the information together, and they look at it and go, well, you know, we don't know what to do with this. We're going to send it to the district attorney's office, and then it's subject to another level of review.
I'm convinced that in a case involving a sexual assault of some, political figure, a speaker at the convention, there's no way that Monterey Police Department took a report of this and didn't forward it to somebody in the district attorney's office. That would have been a complete oversight. And do we see cases of Monterey police officers occasionally screwing things up or cutting corners? Sure. Yeah. But we're talking about low-level crimes. We're talking about like a low-level patrol officer. These are cases that go to sex crimes detectives. These are much more professional individuals with a lot more experience, and they're not going to blow this off because this could blow back on them.
Yeah.
So this definitely gets sent to somebody in the DA's office, and then their job is to take a look at all of the evidence and ask a very simple question if they're doing it right. Can I convict this person beyond a reasonable doubt in a jury trial? And if they don't think that they can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, even if they have suspicion that something happened, even if they feel a little bad for the woman who is crying that this happened, or a man for that reason, or for that matter, they should not be filing these cases. And so let's take a look at what is actually being reported so we can try and understand the thought process behind it. Because Monterey Police Department released a press release in this case.
Yes.
And in the press release that they have released, they've alleged some very basic facts. For example, they've alleged that this incident happened on October 7th, 2017. That's when it was reported to have occurred. That the actual report to the police did not happen until 4 days later. that the incident is believed to have occurred in Hyatt Regency Hotel, where there was a conference of Republican Federation of Republican Women. I believe that's what it was
something
called.
of that nature, yeah.
And Hegseth was one of the speakers invited to present at the conference. According to the press release, the alleged incident or assault happened in early morning hours after the convention was presumably over. And there was an allegation of an injury in the form of contusion, which is basically a bruise found on the inner thigh of this individual, a woman. So Hegseth denies any inappropriate behavior. He basically says this incident was consensual. And apparently, at least according to some of the reports that we're reading, there may have been some sort of confidential settlement or non-disclosure agreement. And that's all we know about this. So with that in mind, first of all, let's attack the part about this non-disclosure agreement. Can somebody hide in California behind a non-disclosure agreement when there is an allegation of sexual crime?
No, that non-disclosure agreement in California is basically null and void. Public policy doesn't permit those. So any non-disclosure agreement that would have been signed has actually no bearing anymore in this case if an actual sex crime had been committed.
In fact, Roland, under Section 136.1 of the Penal Code here in California, it is completely illegal to buy off a victim of a sexual crime. So no one could legally offer compensation or any kind of inducement to either intimidate or dissuade or prevent this alleged victim or accuser from coming forward with an accusation in this case. It would have been a felony for them to do so. So the person who has made this accusation against Hegseth back in 2017 is entitled to a lot of protections under California law. She actually has full access to her own police report. She could release the information if she wanted to, or in the same time could elect to maintain her privacy. And it's not even clear that she's behind this leak.
Yeah.
It may well have been somebody in the Defense Department or another person who got passed up for this, pretty lucrative position, obviously being a head of a agency that employs almost 3 million people with all the, benefits and prestige that it entails.
Yeah. So I think really the bottom line of what we should take from this is that accusations are very easy to be made, that here in Monterey County, any accusation, even though sometimes they are easy to be made, is taken seriously by both the Monterey Police Department and especially the District Attorney's Office, who also has a team of special prosecutors that are looking at this, and they take their job seriously, we know.
And we go up against them on a regular basis every single week, and we don't usually agree with them, or frankly, it's not our habit to usually say flattering things about them, but these guys and gals are pretty good at their job. They're really good. They go to trainings, they go to conferences, and they know how to prosecute sex crimes. So I don't think this is a case where somebody is ignoring an allegation. I think this is a case where somebody looked at it and concluded that for whatever reason, this case could not be proved to the jury, either because they lost the support of the victim who may have reached a side settlement, or because they didn't think the allegation was credible, or because, Hegseth in this case was smart and didn't make the mistakes that some of our clients make, which involve, talking to a police officer, apologizing, participating in a pretext call. I mean, if you're smart, if you hire a lawyer, you really improve your chances of not being accused of something you didn't do.
And we don't know exactly what happened there, but even if they lose the support of the victim in California, they can still prosecute.
They would need to have some additional evidence. I mean, if they have the victim who is willing to testify, under California law, no additional corroboration is required. But if they don't have the support of the victim because maybe the person settles, maybe the person has a change of heart, maybe chooses not to put themselves through, public scrutiny or a public trial, it's going to be really difficult to prosecute a case without a victim willing to come and testify. It would be very, very hard.
No, I understand that, but what I'm asking and what I'm emphasizing in this point is that sex cases go forward, criminal cases go forward, even without the support or spurring on the case by the victims. Quite often there's victims that come after the fact and tell the district attorney's office, I don't want to proceed with this case. They still proceed under California law.
Yeah.
They have no obligation to stop.
No, I misunderstood what you were saying. You're right. So it is true that sometimes victims get subpoenaed to come to court and testify about what happened, whether they want it or not. So that can certainly happen. They don't need to have support, but they still need testimony. They need evidence.
And once a police report is made, the investigation takes on a life of its own. It's not like the police are checking with somebody every day. Do you want me to investigate? No, they do their job. They complete the investigation.
And you get a subpoena.
And then it goes forward.
Right. And if they decide to file the case after speaking with you, obviously, as the person on whose behalf they're initiating it, they're going to subpoena you, and they'll provide you with all kinds of support and, benefits and things of that nature. And the case will move forward if that's what the DA's office decides to do. So, Roland, I wanted to go through some of these facts that we know, and we don't know very much. But the location and the timing of this incident, this is alleged to have happened in early morning hours at the same hotel where the convention was at. We have two conflicting claims. One is a claim of non-consensual behavior. The other one is a claim of consensual act. What does the timing and the location of this suggest to you?
Well, when we're defending these types of cases, we always look at all those details. Where did they meet? How long were they together? What was involved in that? The location, the fact that we had somebody that was from out of town at a conference as a speaker, it tends to lead me to believe that they probably met at that location. Now, we don't know all the facts about this, whether they'd met before and they'd been meeting again. But in general, when we look at these types of cases, this is the type of thing where somebody's meeting. Okay.
Now, another thing we know is that there is a significant delay in reporting here because the call to the Monterey police is not made until 4 days later. Now, what we don't know is whether or not there were any other reports or statements made. And obviously, the delayed reporting is a problem for police investigation, correct?
Yeah, that's one of the things we look at. And quite often, what we find in these cases is sometimes there's consensual behavior, and then either a woman or a man, they return to wherever they live. They start thinking about what they did, and they go, well, I had a little too much to drink that night. I'm not quite sure whether I consented or not. And these are all the pitfalls that our clients fall into on a daily basis.
Sure.
And before you know it, the girl or the guy is making a phone call. And the phone call is usually hits a stone wall. So they don't get a reply from that person, or that person replies rudely, or something happens to lead that person to go, well, he wasn't the person I thought he was, or she was. And then they start thinking, and then they file a complaint. Or they go and they tell their boyfriend, or their wife finds out about it. And all of a sudden, once again, it becomes a non-consensual act when other third parties are involved. And they start throwing their
I agree.
Their input into it.
Yeah, I agree. I think also there are two additional layers to this point. Number one, when you wait for 4 days to report an incident, you're really hampering police investigation and the ability of the investigators to find corroborating evidence. For example, on a fresh report, they are able to do a rape rape examination.
Yeah, you're going to get DNA, potentially.
You could potentially get DNA. You could go through the full sexual assault, rape, trauma examination. Unless a person hasn't showered in 4 days and hasn't changed their, underwear or their clothing, hard to do it 4 days later. Yeah. The other thing is,
not everybody saves their dresses, do they?
Right, and then the other thing is that in California we have something known as the fresh complaint doctrine, and that allows a person in a sexual crimes case, a victim or alleged victim in sexual crimes case, to introduce evidence that they have made a complaint to somebody else. And we don't see any of that being reported. So it's unclear if this individual, shortly after this happened, perhaps she failed to report it to the police, but she confided in other people. Those types of conversations would actually be an exception under California hearsay rule, and they could be potentially admissible. So presumably investigation of a case like this would include a police officer or a sex crimes detective saying, okay, I understand you were traumatized, you didn't call us for 4 days, but can you give us names of people you've spoken with? Who are the people that you have confided in, again, under that fresh complaint doctrine, because they know that each of those reports is potentially individually admissible. So not having that could be a factor when somebody is evaluating credibility of the alleged accuser. Then we have this report of an injury. And I think this is a significant one because I think a lot of folks might read in the press that, oh, this poor woman was injured. She must have been a victim of rape. But in a case involving a question of whether or not an incident was consensual, can a bruise or a contusion by itself tell us whether or not an act was consensual?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't even tell you how the bruise happened. Usually, I mean, you're going to have to take somebody's word for it, how it happened. And now, I will take that back. There are certain injuries that people can suffer, specifically to female anatomy, their private parts, that there's contusions and stuff and bruising there that could signify, for sexual penetration or something like that.
Right.
But in this instance, a simple bruise to a thigh or a calf or something like that is really not going to signify force used or non-consent.
It could just signify that a person was holding it with enough force to leave a mark. It doesn't mean that the holding down was against the person's will. No. It could have been, but you can't infer that necessarily from the mere presence of a contusion, and the word for contusion really just means a bruise. And that reminds me of a jury trial that I have done, if you recall, a year ago, where we had a client who was an immigrant from another country, and he was falsely accused of attempting to rape this lady who was covered in blood, had significant injuries. Both her and another person claimed that our client encountered them in the park, tried to convince them that he was going to have sex with this woman, and proceeded to attack both of them with a stick. But when this played out in trial, the jury actually incorrectly found that what in fact had happened is that our client, who was an immigrant from another country, was simply walking through a park wearing a piece of jewelry. It was a golden crucifix that he brought with him from El Salvador. And it was at that park that he was accosted by a homeless couple that tried to rob him of his jewelry item. Yes. And in the process of attempting to rob him, a fight ensued, and this woman, as well as the man, sustained some injuries, which they later lied about and claimed were inflicted in a process of attempted rape. But that's not what happened, and that's not what the jury believed. And we were able to do a lot of investigation on the accuser's background, and we had their own family members coming in essentially saying, this person is a drug addict, this person is a liar, this person makes things up and falsely accuses people all the time. And so at the end of the day, the jury had no patience for that, and they found the person acquitted. Huh. And this is an individual who did not have the benefits that Mr. Hegseth had.
And but it clearly shows that there's a variety of reasons why people make false accusations. I mean, when you're looking at your own criminal liability sometimes, it's very easy to make an accusation. We see that especially in family situations with stepchildren getting in trouble, and they go, well, you think this is bad, what did my stepfather do to me? And then all of a sudden, that investigation goes along. So it just reinforces the fact how easy it is to make these kind of accusations and how they have to really be carefully looked at.
I agree with you, especially when there is a possibility of a financial payoff. I mean, Hegseth in 2017 was not exactly the person in the spotlight that he is today, but he was a man of some substance. I mean, you could ask questions about his, character and extramarital affairs and all this other stuff that was floating around the news. But the gentleman was a TV host. He published books. He certainly had some assets, and so that made him that made him clearly a target. And so when you carelessly engage with strangers at a convention, even if you're doing nothing wrong, you can totally create an appearance and make yourself vulnerable to false accusations, just like Kobe Bryant, just like a lot of other famous individuals.
That's a very good point, that when you're in a situation like this, at a hotel room, far away from home,
from your family,
from your
wife, from your mistress,
whoever, and that you don't know who you're dealing with. And a lot of people have different agendas.
Exactly. And you might think you're about to have a fun midnight liaison, and all of a sudden you find yourself on the brink of sexual assault allegations and the prospect of a hefty payout.
Yeah. So you just don't know that. So I think the bottom line in this whole incident is it's really instructive to a lot of people about the nature of these allegations, how these allegations come across, what the police do in the investigation, that they do take these seriously. And that's something to really consider, because anytime anybody makes an accusation, as easy it is, the police are going to investigate it. They're going to look at it. So a lot of people do wind up getting charges because either they talk to the police, they apologize to somebody, even when something did happen, they tell them they're sorry. So these cases come about. But I think the bottom line is that we see in cases like this, that we know from our experience that, number one, any victim, alleged victim, that reports something to the police
will get follow-up.
Is going to get an investigation. The police are going to ask the appropriate questions. They're going to have specialized officers when they find that it's a sex crime. And then it's going to go from the police department, because the police department doesn't want to be seen as just rejecting cases because they have liability. They're worried about it. They're going to send the case to the district attorney's office. The district attorney's office, who also has a specialized team of sex prosecutors that are some of the most experienced prosecutors, are going to review it. And then only at that point in time does the case end, or the investigation end.
Or begins.
And sometimes the case gets to the district attorney's office, and they have another team of specialized investigators on sex cases that can go out and do further investigation if warranted.
And so I guess the takeaway from this is that, just as Hegseth's lawyer said, all that we can take from this allegation is just that 7 years ago, someone accused that person of sexual assault, that at no point was that allegation actually confirmed or disproved. At no point did it result in filing of any criminal charges, and that unless the people who actually have access to underlying reports choose to share them with others, so everyone can see for themselves what was actually said, what actually happened, it's completely unfair, no matter how much we might dislike Pete Hegseth or might want somebody else to be Secretary of Defense, it's completely unfair to take a naked allegation and use it against someone, as opposed to truly focusing on the merits of the appointment and ask legitimate questions, as opposed to exploiting it for cheap, quick, easy, and dirty political gain.
Yes.
And I think that's all we can say on this subject.
Yes, and we thank you for listening today. And if you like this, click like, subscribe to our channel. We appreciate everybody. If you have questions, feel free to interact. We love it when people ask questions, don't we?
Yes, we do. We have a lot of other videos for you to watch, and stay out of trouble.